There we go. I'm going to share your PowerPoint. And we'll get going.
All right, we all good? Okay, excellent. Hello there, friends. So this is wild. I've done Zooms and I've done lives, but I've never done it both. So I'm gonna try and make this work as best we possibly can. I gotta say, and so if I'm not staring at you, I'm staring at you and vice versa. So no disrespect intended. So first of all, your name is Mary, you said? Mary, okay. So Mary and Hector, I know what you do because I represent home care agencies. I probably represent more home care agencies than any lawyer in the state. So, and with Senior Helpers, I served on the board of directors for the Home Care Association of America with Peter Ross. So
Okay.
I know exactly who you folks are, and it's excellent. Okay. But I'm not talking about that. So today, I'm not talking about what you do. I'm not talking about hiring through an agency. I'm talking if someone's going to be hired directly, then what the process is. Okay. Although I can certainly talk about what Mary and Hector, what you two do in terms of your operations or the wage orders or any of that sort of stuff, if you want to talk about that. Okay, so Carolyn, you said you're going to monitor the chat if anybody has any questions?
Yes.
All right, terrific. So especially given how many of us there are, this is really a conversation and nobody needs to hear me talk for an hour. That's, I think, the literal definition of intentional infliction of emotional distress. So please stop me at any time if you've got questions, you want to talk about something that I'm talking about. You two have outlines there to follow along, and then you all online should be able to see my presentation here. And so let's just go through this. Okay, great. So but please do stop me anytime. And I know, Hector, you have to leave early. That's fine. If you got questions, my contact information is at the end of this presentation as well. Okay.
Great, thank you.
So I need to sound like a lawyer just for a moment. It will be painful but brief, I promise, to tell you that I'm providing you with just general information. I'm not trying to provide you with formal legal advice. I certainly can do that, but to do that, you need to retain our firm. So please take everything you hear here as purely informational, and we can talk specifics offline if you'd like. Okay, let's just make sure I can do this. Let's see if we can move this up. Well, I'll just do it like, no, there we go. Okay. So as I said, there's two types of home care. There's the home care through an agency, which Mary and Hector, you guys do very well. But that's not what I'm talking about. That is a turnkey solution for anyone and everyone who's listening. It is super easy. You hire Mary, you hire Hector, and you're done. It's a wonderful sort of thing. Somebody's getting a call. It sounds like it's all right. Sorry. It's wonderful. I'm talking today about direct hires, where a family decides they want to directly hire a nanny or a caregiver or anybody working in their home, what the rules are for them. Okay. All right. So the first thing is, let me back up and tell you a little bit about our firm. It's called Legally Nanny. We have an odd name because 19 years ago, we hired a nanny for my daughter because I was determined to do this legally. And I couldn't find anybody who knew all the legal and tax issues of hiring somebody in their home. And I worked for a big law firm. I had big firm clients and all of that sort of nonsense. But the rules for working in your home are different. And then we started getting people calling and saying, I'm not hiring a nanny, I'm hiring a caregiver for my mom or my dad. Can you help me with that? And the rules are basically the same. And so I said, sure, we can help you with that. And then we started getting home care agencies and nanny agencies calling and saying, you actually understand what we do. Can you help us with our businesses? And so we morphed into that as well. So now the irony of Legally Nanny is I probably do 90% of my work is home care, and the 10% is nanny related. People say we should rebrand and call ourselves Legally Granny, so it is under consideration. So yes. All right. So the first question I get from people when they hire somebody in their home, and this happens constantly, is, oh no, I 1099 my caregiver and I just cut them off right there. I am miserable to talk to if you're calling me out of the blue and you're trying to argue for your position, because they'll say I 1099 my caregiver and I cut them off, and I say you can't do that. They're always an employee. Okay, sometimes people call lawyers, they want to argue. This is not sport for me, at least not for me. I don't enjoy this. This isn't something I do as a hobby. Okay, I mean I can argue, but I don't seek to argue. Put it to that way. And people, it's sort of like going to the right doctor, right? You keep going to another doctor until he tells you you finally hear what you want to hear, right? So do you have an employee? Yes. Caregivers are never, ever, 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 ever under federal or state law, independent contractors. They are always employees, okay? And so people will push back on that and they'll say, well, why is that? And the reason is control. The law presumes that you control how the caregiver does his or her job. Okay, that's just the way it is. It's not like if, for example, if this computer were to not function correctly, I would bring it to an IT store and I would say, fix it. I don't tell them how to fix it, right? Therefore, that IT person is a consultant, an independent contractor. But if I hire a caregiver for my mom, I'm going to explain all the things that my mom needs and what the caregiver should do. I'm not going to tell her how to be a caregiver, but I am going to tell her, okay, so mom likes this, doesn't like that. She wants her bath then, she does this then, goes to the doctor's appointment. I micromanage it, and that's not really the correct term, but I manage it far more so than I would with an independent contractor. And that level of control, and now, by the way, you may have heard about the ABC test under California law. It's virtually impossible for anybody to be an independent contractor these days. I mean, although I specialize in home care, I work with a wide variety of, that's not me, that's all I know. I work with a wide variety of clients, and you know, everything from yoga studios where the owner of a yoga studio is complaining because, oh my gosh, you know, my yoga instructors now my employees. And they're like, yeah, under ABC, they are your employees. That's just the way California law works. It's designed to analyze the control. Is this in the usual course of business? And if you're a household, if you're a family, employing somebody in your household is in the usual course of business. And does the person engage in an independent trade? Meaning, do they have a storefront? Are they their own business open to the public? And most caregivers are not that. Also, if you have any doubt, there are two publications. There's IRS publication 926 and California DE 8829 that formally confirm in writing that caregivers are employees. So please don't listen to anybody who tries to tell you that a caregiver is an independent contractor. And it doesn't matter if the caregiver says he or she wants to be an independent contractor. It doesn't matter if you enter into an agreement that says they're an independent contractor. I could enter into an agreement that says I'm a pink elephant. It doesn't make me a pink elephant, okay? So please remember, always employees. Okay, so then the second, and you can see this, you can see the wheels churning in their head when they have this conversation with me. And the next question they'll say, oh, by the way, I want to be very clear. There is an exception to everything I just said. If it's a parent, a spouse, or a child, okay, then they're not covered by the wage and hour laws. Okay, so if you're caring for your mother, or your child is, or your spouse is caring for you, or your child is caring for you, then they're not an employee. I'm not talking about family sort of relationships here. Okay, so please exclude those. But if it's someone other than a parent, spouse, or child, absolutely that caregiver is your employee. Okay. So the next thing they always say is, okay, so I have an employee. I'm not going to get caught, right? How would I get caught? There's no way. I'm not running for president. I'm not up for attorney general. There's no way I'm going to get caught. Okay. So the most common way people get caught is not intentional. It's because the caregiver lives paycheck to paycheck. And when you let that caregiver go, even if you let her go amicably, like say the client passes away, okay, and they'll often give a gift to the caregiver in recognition of the caregiver's service and all that. So they part ways completely friendly. Well, that caregiver has to make the mortgage. So what is she going to do? She's going to go down to the unemployment office and she's going to file for employment. This just happened to a friend of ours. Unbelievable. And when she files for benefits, she's going to list the family as the employer, and the family is going to get caught like that. And there's no defense to it. And it's not just unemployment, although that's the most common. If she's injured, she's going to file for workers' comp or disability. If she's older, she may file for Social Security benefits and realize that her benefits could be a lot higher if she declared more years of work, or Medicare if she's injured, or Medicaid if she's injured. Any of these sorts of governmental filings for any sort of benefits are going to trigger a letter from the state saying, hey, Mary Smith, your caregiver, says you employed her for the last 3 years. What say you? Right? And if she can show any sort of income, and even if it's Zelle or Venmo payments from you or whatever it is the family is doing to pay this person, they're on the hook. Okay. So, and that's just the unintentional ways. If either party gets audited, the IRS is going to say, why is there a fixed sum of money coming out of this household every week going to Mary Smith? Or Mary Smith, where are you getting your income that you haven't declared? Okay. And then there's the worst scenarios, because here's the thing. For the employee, if she doesn't withhold taxes, her tax burden is pretty low. This is not really going to be a problem for her. And she's looking at all these benefits. So she'll threaten to blackmail clients. This happens on a somewhat regular basis. She'll say, look, I'm gonna turn you in. I'm gonna call the IRS. Not say I'm gonna drop a dime, but that would really age me. As my children roll their eyes, they don't understand those sayings. But I'm gonna call the IRS and tell them about this unless you pay me X, Y, or Z. Happens not uncommonly, a couple times a year. I see it in my practice where the caregiver is trying to exert some sort of leverage over the family because she knows the family has done things illegally. And the family doesn't want the IRS auditing its taxes anyway, because if they've done one thing illegally, they've probably done other things illegally. So there's the potential for blackmail. So I implore you, if you have the ability, to counsel people to do things legally and in fact file the taxes. And we're going to get through all of what that entails. Okay, so the next thing is they'll say, okay, I don't have an employee. That's wrong. They'll say, I'm not going to get caught. That's wrong. And then they'll say, so what if I get caught? Then I'll pay the taxes when I get caught. Big deal, Okay, well, it doesn't work that way because the IRS will remind you that you have to pay your share of taxes, plus the taxes that you should have withheld. Under California and federal law, employers are required to withhold payroll taxes. Okay, so that's the employee's share of Social Security, Medicare, and state disability insurance. And because the law says, hey, look, employer, you're responsible for this. If you don't do it, you have to pay it. So all of a sudden you've doubled your tax burden because you already had your tax burden to withhold the employer's share of this stuff. Now you have to withhold the employee's share. If you don't do it, you have to pay it. So you basically, if you get caught, your taxes have doubled, never mind penalties and interest. I was once in an audit with the IRS where the IRS auditor reminded my client that, here, you look at your taxes because you signed them under penalty of perjury, right? And you can literally see the blood draining from my client's face because it's as the IRS auditor so happily reminded my client, it's felony federal tax fraud if in fact you lie on your taxes. And you're lying on your taxes if you don't pay your household employee properly because you report those wages on your taxes. So as a result, there's penalties, interest, taxes, perjury, tax evasion charges, fines, reputational and career issues. This continues along. Like if you are in any sort of licensed profession, and this may actually, I don't know if this applies for home care agencies, but like I know it applies for like doctors and lawyers and architects or anyone licensed by the state. If you're even charged with a felony, which federal tax fraud is, you have to report it to your licensing authority. You potentially jeopardize your ability to earn a living. In fact, actually it would be because with home care agencies, of course, everyone undergoes a background check. So that would come up. So it's not that you would do this, but my point is that anyone who's licensed by the state potentially runs the risk of not being able to earn a living because of this. Oh, I also had the same IRS agent, as she was a hoot. She reminded my client, she goes, if you advise your caregiver not to withhold taxes, you've also engaged in conspiracy. So like, this just is like right out of Al Capone. Right? I'm thinking, my God, this has turned so wrong in so many ways. Not to mention big professional fees, because although I'm nice, I'm also expensive. So what I always tell people is, look, you can pay me a little bit of money to help you do it right, or you can pay me a lot of money to defend you if you've done it wrong. And so, okay, so let's. I don't base my practice on fear though. And I'm sorry, I know this is awkward. I keep trying to. I'm not trying to. Okay, all right. I feel like I'm ignoring half my people half the time. So, okay. I don't base my practice on fear. And so what that means is there are also significant advantages to doing things legally. And so let's talk about the advantages to the caregiver for doing things legally. Well, actually, let's back up. Let's talk about it for the client. So if you can declare the person receiving care, so your parent, for example, as your dependent, you can access a dependent care account and put that money in pre-tax and use it to pay for the caregiver. So people do this with nannies all the time. Obviously, your children are your dependents. So like you can take $5,000, for example, put it into a dependent care account. You save the taxes on that, and then you withdraw that to pay the nanny. Well, same thing, if your parent is your dependent, then you can also use that money out of the dependent care account and save taxes on it. There's also a federal and child and dependent care tax credit that would allow you to get a credit for doing this. But unlike businesses like Hector and Mary, like when you have an employee, you can write that off. Household employers can't do that. So please, whenever you hear household employers saying, oh yeah, I'll just write it off, you can't write it off. There is no write-off, but there is access to a dependent care account or a federal child and dependent care tax credit if you can declare the person receiving care as a dependent. There's also cash flow issues. Obviously, if you're withholding the taxes, you're paying out less on a weekly basis, so your cash flow is a little bit better. But the bottom line, in addition to it being the law, I mean, I can't walk into Target and saying, I'm feeling a little light today, let's hold the taxes, right? You have to do this, but in addition, it's your own peace of mind. Without exaggeration, I get at least one call a month from somebody in tears. Because what happens is if you don't pay this person legally, you're often also usually violating wage and hour laws. There's a 3 or a 4 year statute on those, depending on which laws we're talking about. People lose their houses over this. It's a 6-figure number, right? It's crazy in terms of the potential liability. Your peace of mind, you will sleep much better just doing things legally from the get-go. Not to mention, by the way, one thing, not to mention, a lot of our clients are fiduciaries, trustees, conservators. They're legally and ethically bound to do things. It's malpractice if they're aware of it and they're not doing something about it. So like if you counsel, if you run into those people and they're employing somebody in their home and like, oh, I'm just 1099ing them, you ought to really warn them. Yes.
What are the guidelines for a parent becoming considered a dependent?
Sure. So for a parent to be a dependent, the child would have to pay a majority of the parent's living expenses. Okay. So you have to financially support your parent, basically. Okay, and it's a little more complicated than that, but the long and short is, if you can demonstrate that you pay more than half of your parents' expenses, you can qualify them as a dependent. Okay, all right. Okay, so and then there are significant advantages to the caregiver for doing things legally. Again, caregivers oftentimes just think of the short-term dollars and cents. I want to take home as much as I possibly can. But then they get access, if they do things legally, they get access to the government benefits. So that's unemployment, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, disability, workers' comp. They also build an employment history. They establish credit. Like, for example, our nanny, when she was working for us, she was going to buy a condo. Well, the only way she could do that is by showing the W-2 forms from us, right? She would never have been able to do that otherwise. There's also a federal earned income tax credit for those people who earn lower amounts of wages. So in fact, when you talk about a caregiver doing things legally, they actually may end up paying very little, if any, taxes because of the federal earned income tax credit. Okay. So there's lots of advantages to educate that caregiver. Also, sometimes that caregiver doesn't really care about working legally or not. They just need to know what they take home. So we can solve these problems by saying, hey, look, if you need to take home $750 a week, we'll just gross up your pay so you take home $750 a week. We'll still deal with all the taxes. And oftentimes they could care less. But frequently there are problems, okay? They don't want to declare either because they don't want to pay the taxes or they're getting some sort of governmental benefits. I've seen caregivers getting child support, so they don't want to declare the income. They're in subsidized housing. They don't want to declare the income. Any sort of other programs where they're getting money from somebody else, they're reticent to it. Not to mention the fact if they're not legally allowed to work in the US, they don't want to go anywhere near the taxes, right? But this sort of ferrets it out. And it's funny because when I first started practicing, I've been a lawyer now for 24 years. When I first started talking to somebody, a client, about like, hey, you should do things legally. And I was going through this spiel and she was a mom and she cut me off. She goes, you don't need to tell me. And she goes, if my caregiver is willing to lie to the government about her taxes, I ask myself, what is she willing to lie to me about? And I thought, well, that really encapsulates things perfectly. That's exactly right. To me, it goes to ethics and integrity. We all have to pay taxes, whether you like it or not. It is what it is. Okay. And here's the kicker, because everybody thinks, oh my gosh, it's so much more expensive to hire legally. It's really not. Your burden to hiring legally is 9%. 9% as an employer. That's what your extra cost is, okay? And that's your share, that's the employer's share of Social Security, Medicare, and disability insurance, and other assorted taxes. So if you pay somebody $100, it's gonna cost you $109. They're gonna walk home with no more than $91 plus whatever deducted for their federal and state personal income taxes, okay? And then if you qualify for the dependent care tax treatment, your burden could be as little as 4%. Either is a small price to pay for your peace of mind. Okay. All right. And again, those of you online, you're not here, interrupt me at any time. We can talk about whatever you want, whether or not I'm talking about it. We can talk about whatever you want to talk about too. That's fine. Okay. That's sort of the tax portion of things. I want to go into the wage and hour issues and talk about overtime and minimum wage and all that. Okay. So, and this is true for Mary and Hector, as well as household employers. Your caregivers are governed by California Wage Order 15. Okay. and the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA. What does that mean? Okay, so if your caregivers, and this is true for the family caregivers as well as yours, are working in a private home and they spend 80% of their time supervising, feeding, and dressing, okay, 80% supervising, feeding, dressing, they are personal attendants. That is the gold standard. And by the way, free legal advice for Hector and Mary, please make sure that personal attendant stuff, those words, personal attendants, are in your employee handbook, and the 80% rule is in your employee handbook, that your caregivers are to spend 80% of the time supervising, feeding, and dressing the elderly or disabled client. Also, I am not, just for those of you who are, this often gets confused. I'm not talking about home health here, okay? I'm strictly talking about non-medical caregivers. So I'm not talking about nurses or anyone that's doing medical tasks, okay? Those people are governed under totally different wage orders. You have to pay them overtime, double time, meal periods, rest periods, all this other stuff that we're not talking about here. These are just non-medical caregivers. They're companions who help with feeding, dressing, bathing, transportation. Like the rule of thumb is they can't engage in any sort of medical tasks, so they can't do injections. They can change a catheter bag, but they cannot insert a catheter. Anything that requires any higher level of degree, skill, or training, those are medical tasks. They are not allowed under Hector and Mary, under what you guys can do, and they will also lose the exemption that we're talking about here as personal attendants. Okay, all right. So a few warning signs. Most caregivers are personal attendants. It's a pretty straightforward sort of thing, okay, as long as they're working in a private home. But be careful. I'm going to give you some like landmines that you could hit to lose the exemption. And I'm going to tell you why the exemption is so important. It's really critical. Your first danger is housekeeping, okay? If all of a sudden this caregiver is spending more than 20% of her time as a housekeeper, you got a problem because you've lost the exemption. Okay, housekeeping is fine. But remember, 20%, like that's a good chunk of time. Okay, if you're running an 8-hour shift, for goodness sake, it's almost 2 hours. So, I mean, they can do some housekeeping. They can do an hour and a half of housekeeping. That's fine. It's just, if they spend more than 20% on housekeeping, they're a housekeeper. They're not a caregiver. And that housekeeper is entitled to meal periods, rest periods, double time, and overtime in other situations. So just keep their focus on the person and not the house is the best way to describe it. The second danger where you can lose the exemption is if you're in a facility, okay? Please be careful. Now, I will argue to my dying day that an independent living facility is a private home, okay? It looks like a private home. I mean, hell, some of these places I'd live in them, they're 55 and older, they're gorgeous, right? They get, and I had an audit of a home care agency where we took the inspector with us to one of these places, and they're apartments. They have doors that lock. They have their own kitchens. Yes, there's a common dining area, but you're not required to use it. They have their own bathrooms. They are apartments, right? Okay, open and shut. Yep, these are caregivers staffed here, no problems. 2 weeks later, we were overruled by the supervisor, by the auditor supervisor. And I said, what the hell happened? And he said, well, interesting. If you look at the rules on this facility and the leases, you will find that it's not like a private home. They restrict how many visitors you can have, when visitors can have. They restrict what you can do to the unit. They have the right of first refusal for sale. All of these sorts of things that all of a sudden don't sound like a private home anymore. So I would tell you that it's arguable if it's independent, whether or not it's a private home. I wouldn't take that chance. I would treat them as non-personal tenants if they're working in any sort of facility. Certainly if it's an assisted living facility or a nursing home, or if you do staffing in a hospital, no, those are not personal tenants. You'll lose the exemption. Also, and I mean this sincerely, beware the fully grown adult child that lives with the senior, okay? Okay, and God help them, it's always the son, okay? Nothing good can come of a fully grown adult son living with his mother, because what's going to happen is that caregiver is going to spend more than 20% of her time on tasks related to the son. She's going to do the son's laundry. She's going to make the son's meals. She's going to clean the son's room. She's going to be doing stuff that has nothing to do with the senior who's supposed to be getting the care. Yes, Tara.
I have a question about the 20% rule. Like, what if your caregiver goes into the hospital with you and then spends their time with you at a skilled nursing facility? Does that?
Right, you'd lose. So it all depends on if it's permanent or temporary. Okay, and so if it's a hospital visit, if they go like for the day or something like that, I'm not worried about it. If it's a week or any prolonged period of time, right, months at a time, they're definitely not personal tenants, because on a regular basis they are not in a private home, and therefore you lose the exemption.
So not for social purposes to make sure the senior stays active and their mind is healthy inside these facilities?
It's totally fine. I'm not saying it's illegal. I'm just saying they wouldn't be considered
Oh,
personal
that's
attendants,
gonna
right?
be-
So if they're not personal attendants, they're entitled to meal periods, rest periods, and I'm going to go through that. But if they're personal attendants, the only thing you have to do is pay them overtime after 9 hours in a day and after 40 hours in a week. There's no meal periods, there's no rest periods, there's nothing else. So it's the gold standard for what we're trying to do here. Okay, so be careful of housekeeping, facilities, adults, other adults that are capable in the home, medically related activities. Again, we get into this all the time. Like if you have a caregiver who's literally popping a pill in somebody's mouth, that is not allowed. That will lose you the exemption. Okay, so and the way to think about that is they cannot administer medication, and administer by law is defined under health and safety as introducing into the body. Okay, so I can remind you to take your pills. Okay, that's fine. I can even bring the pill box to you. Okay, but I cannot put the pill in your mouth. Okay, so that's the way to distinguish it in terms of, because if you engage in these medical activities, you potentially run the risk of losing the exemption. Okay. Yes. So let's talk about how you pay these caregivers, because this is truly one of the most dangerous things for people who directly employ caregivers. These caregivers, and this is true of your caregivers as well, are non-exempt employees. They must be paid hourly, and they are entitled to overtime. So when I hear about people paying shift rates, day rates, overnight, weekly, or monthly rates, those are incredibly dangerous. That is literally the worst mistake you can make under the law. And here's why. Under California law, if you pay a salary to a non-exempt person, that salary by law can only cover the regular hours. You get no credit, goose egg, for overtime. Okay, so you may pay somebody a salary of $1,000 a week, whatever, $1,500 a week, and you're thinking that'll cover whenever she works or whatever. For a true salaried employee, of course it would. For a caregiver, it won't. Okay, so instead, what you've done is that $1,000 a week, you take that and you divide it by 40, and you've got a $25 hourly rate, which means you've got $37.50 for overtime that you owe, and you get no credit for any of those overtime hours. So it's a disastrous mistake that when you salary somebody, you will easily end up owing 6 figures in liability going back 3 to 4 years, depending on what the statute of limitations is. So please don't pay any sort of shift, day, weekly, monthly rate, overnight rate. Like that's another thing too. You'll often, and we're going to talk about sleep time. You'll hear like, oh, I pay them an overnight rate of $100 if they sleep over. No, you cannot do that. Okay. Just remember, everything must be hourly. Okay. All right. Let's just keep going here. And again, chime in with any questions in the room or otherwise. Okay. So
this is private and.
this is. So, all right. So California law, again, it's 9 and 40. Please, I get this question all the time. People challenge me. They say, no, it's 9 and 45. Okay, it is 9 and 45 under California law, but under federal law, under federal law, it's 9 and 40. What do I mean? 9 in a day and 40 in a week. Okay, if you work a caregiver more than, if you work a caregiver more than 9 hours in a day or more than 40 hours in a week, not 45, 40 in a week, you owe them overtime. Okay, the only exception to this, and it doesn't apply to Mary or Hector, but the only exception is if you directly employ a live-in candidate, okay, a live-in caregiver, then your overtime is after 9 in a day and after 45 in a week. That exception only applies to live-in caregivers who are directly employed by the family. Everybody else, 9 and 40 is the operative overtime rule. Okay. All right. So live-in caregivers. This is something that should strike fear in the heart of everyone with a checkbook, because mother of God, it is expensive. And I know that you too will appreciate this. Do you do live-in care?
No.
You don't? Okay.
We do 24/7, but we don't do that.
Right. Okay. So fine. You do 24/7. Do you staff it with one caregiver?
No.
Okay.
We do
Right.
3 shifts a week or.
There you go. Right. Okay. So let's just follow along here for those who are thinking about live-in care. And by the way, I get this call all the time. So people will call and they'll say, oh my gosh, we're so generous to the caregiver. And whenever they start telling me how generous they are, I know that they are cheapskates and they're not paying correctly. Oh, well, she lives in a house on a hill in Malibu. And, you know, she drives my mother's car, which is a Mercedes, and I get all this sort of stuff. And we pay her $100 a day. And you know what? She's sleeping a lot of the time because my mother sleeps and she watches TV. She's not really working. Pay her $100 a day. Give her, she can eat whatever she wants out of the fridge, and she has this gorgeous place. Does she have to stay there? Oh yeah, she can't leave mom alone. Okay, so you require her to be there? Yes. Okay, great. Well, then you have to pay her for all 24 hours that she's there. Okay, and that's the rule. If you require the caregiver to remain on the premises, meaning the caregiver cannot sleep somewhere else. She can't sleep in her own bed. She can't go to Vegas for the weekend. She can't go to see the 2 a.m. Movie, whatever. She can't. She has to be there. You have to pay her. So what does that mean? On a 24-hour day, the first 9 hours are at straight time. Okay, the next 15 hours are overtime. The current California minimum wage for small employers is $14 an hour. Okay, for employers, larger employers, those with 26 or more employees, it's $15 an hour. Okay, so for Hector and Mary, you guys are at 15, but for homeowners, for families, they're at 14. Okay, yes.
Isn't there any difference if they're getting room and board?
All right, so I'll talk about that. But very little is the short answer to that. Okay, so but at $14 a day, okay, sorry, $14 an hour. I've done the math on this. It will cost you $441 a day if you staff one person to work 24 hours. And it will cost Mary and Hector more because you guys are at 15. Okay. So that is insane. Any way you cut it, it's insane. So what I always tell people is if someone really, truly, first you have to drill down, do they really, truly need 24-hour care, right? Because a lot of times with technology, you can monitor if the person is asleep or if they're mobile or what their heart rate is. You can do a lot of stuff with technology. Do you really need somebody there 24/7? And if you do, the common way to staff it is 212s, although you can staff it with 3/8s. Some people dislike 3/8, sort of a merry-go-round of caregivers, and the shift changes are at 11 o'clock at night, so they're a little odd. Plus, it's hard to find that many caregivers. So it's usually staffed with 212s, but it doesn't really matter. And what's the advantage? You still have to pay for all 24 hours, but the advantage of using 212s is you cut down on the number of overtime hours. So it's a less expensive process. Now, you mentioned about room and board. So yes, if the employee agrees voluntarily in writing, you can take a small credit for the value of room and board, okay? But when I say small, I mean small. 3 meals a day, the credit's $14, okay, per day. $14, okay? And it has to be 3 meals, and I'm not making this up because I actually had a case on this. It's 3 meals of a balanced serving of nutritious foods, okay? So if you're thinking of shoving mac and cheese in front of a caregiver's face, that's not a meal. That doesn't count. You violated the agreement. The value you get for room and board is 2/3 of the rental, but there's a minimum. It's like $400 and a maximum of like $1,000. So you could rent out this most gorgeous penthouse. You're not going to get 2/3 the value of the rental of the penthouse. You're going to get a maximum of it's like about $1,000. Okay. So, and the caregiver has to have their own room. Okay. It can't just like the caregiver can't be sleeping in the same room as the client. That doesn't count as room and board. So yes, there's a tiny savings if the caregiver agrees in writing to the crediting the value of room and board against the minimum wage. But understand this, caregivers hate that, okay? And the reason why they hate it is because, look, if I pay you $100, I'm gonna subtract $20 in taxes and you're gonna walk home with 80 bucks. If instead I pay you $100 and I credit 20 of that as room and board, and then I take out 20 in taxes, you're bringing home 60 bucks, right? Because I can credit 20 of that is not cash, but it's room and board. So all of a sudden your paycheck shrinks dramatically because you're still taxed on the full 100. Okay, it's just 20 of it is treated as room and board. So in general, caregivers dislike it. The credit is very small. It's also dangerous in terms of the meal period, like the meal stuff. If they don't get 3, I've had caregivers argue, I only got 2 meals a day, or one of them wasn't sufficient, or whatever. There was no food in the house, or I'm vegan and they don't have stuff for me to eat, or I'm not making this up. I've heard all of this sort of stuff.
Isn't
So-
the caregiver preparing the meals?
Sure, but right, but then the question is, are you buying food for the caregiver too? And are you gonna let the caregiver do that? And vegan food's expensive, and is that gonna, increase the bills or whatever it is, I mean, I'm just playing devil's advocate with you here because that comes up all the time.
This is for a private.
Yeah, it's for private caregivers. Yeah. Home care agencies would never do this, but even so, there is a small savings, but it's bureaucratic and it's not that much, and caregivers don't like it. So, okay. All right, so we talked about this, the alternative staffings of 3/8 and 2/12s. Okay. I also want to be clear, if you have a caregiver who lives in the house and isn't working the entire time, it's critical that you have defined work hours for that caregiver, because that caregiver is going to say, oh, hey, I was working 24/7. No, you weren't. You were working 9 to 5, and then I came home and sat with mom and whatever. No, I was, no. Please. So the legally safest course, if the caregiver lives in the residence and you claim that the caregiver isn't working all the time, have defined work hours, have language in an employment agreement. You should always have an employment agreement that says, look, if you remain on the premises during non-working hours, you're not on call, you're not on duty, you're not expected to respond, you can leave at any time, et cetera, we're not paying you for these hours, okay? It's very, very dangerous to have a live-in caregiver on the premises, because I guarantee you that caregiver is going to claim that he or she was working 24/7. And how do you disprove that if you're not there?
Right.
Okay. Right. Or whatever, or even if you're alive and have dementia, okay? Like if I'm the son and there's a live-in caregiver with my mom who happens to be in Massachusetts, how on God's green earth am I going to prove when or not that caregiver is working? It's going to be the caregiver's word against mine, and I don't have a word because I don't have firsthand knowledge of it. She's going to say, oh, you have no idea, your mother's a handful, or she gets up at night and wanders, or whatever, all these sorts of things, right? So please, live-in caregivers are fine, but define their work hours or pay them for all 24/7. Okay. Oh, this one's important. And this one, again, there's a lot of overlap here. So this is helpful for you and you. Weighted overtime. If you pay an employee 2 different rates of pay in the same work week, you have to average those rates of pay to determine what the overtime is. Too many people make the mistake of simply paying time and a half, whatever the rate is when you go into overtime. So for example, you may say, look, I pay one rate during the week, but I pay a different rate over the weekend. And you have 2 different caregivers, right? Fine. But then the weekend caregiver calls out sick. And so you say to the weekday caregiver, hey, can you work the weekend? I'll pay you what I was paying her. It's more. Okay, fine, great. Then you have to average those rates of pay over the course of the week to determine what the regular rate is and multiply that. That's what you use to determine the overtime rate. Okay, so the way to I know you're squinting at me, so like I'm trying to let me
No, I'm
let me give you an example. Like if you pay somebody like 30 hours at $20 an hour,
Right.
and you pay them and then another 20 hours at $25 an hour, what's the overtime rate? Well, you'd have to get a pen and paper out to figure that out, because it's 50 hours. You take 30 times 20 and 20 times 25. You figure out whatever the total wage rate is for that, divide it by 50 hours, and that's your regular rate. But you take half of and add it onto whatever rate you're paying.
But it doesn't matter if you pay caregiver A $20 an hour and you pay caregiver B
I don't care.
$16 an
Nope,
hour.
I don't care about that.
That doesn't
No.
matter.
But
You
I do
have
care,
to
right,
stay
right.
Same with that.
Right,
caregiver.
but or you can pay caregiver A 2 different rates, but if you pay that caregiver 2 different rates in the same work week, that's when you have to average them.
Got it.
If you use Clear Care, okay,
Yeah.
so be careful. Clear Care is a wonderful program, but it's complicated, okay? And so they have 2 different settings that seem very similar on this. One is weighted overtime and one is blended. You want to make sure you're on blended, okay? That's what's required under California law, is blended. Okay, and this happens a lot because maybe you'll staff somebody in the like it'll happen with an office employee. Maybe you have somebody who works 9 to 5 in your office and she also works on call for you on the weekends. Maybe you pay her a different rate for on call. Okay, well, if she works 9 to 5, she's entitled to overtime after 8 hours in a day. So if she works the full day on Friday and then works for half an hour on call Friday night because she's answering phones, you owe her half an hour. That's overtime. What's the overtime rate? Is it 1.5 times the on-call rate? No, it's 1.5. It's the blended overtime rate. Okay, and that's the thing that screws people up. And here's how awful California law is. Some people will say, so what? I'll pay overtime at the higher rate. I don't care. I'm generous. I'm a really nice guy. I'll pay more money. Okay, the pay stub's wrong. And because the pay stub is wrong, because you didn't calculate overtime correctly, even though you overpaid, there's a separate penalty for the erroneous pay stub. Okay, unbelievable, but it's absolutely true. And every time you do it, there is a penalty that applies for that erroneous pay
Isn't
stub.
it just easier to pay the caregiver the same rate?
100% it is.
That's
100% it is. I totally recommend that. But there will, but there will be times. Okay, but okay, like I really enjoy this because I know I don't run a home care agency, but I know what you do. Okay, and so sometimes you may say, well, it's a long drive. I'm going to give you a little bit more. Or there's a couple. Or oh my God, Mrs. Smith is horrendous. I'm going to give you a little bit more. Or super late notice. You know, my normal caregiver canceled. Can you pick up this shift? I'll give you an extra $2 an hour. Right. So, I mean, I just rattled off the top of my head, like 4 different times where you can like, maybe might pay more. I'm not saying you particularly, but like where agencies may pay more. So it's very common to see different rates of pay in the same work week to the same caregiver for a variety of
You just
circumstances.
say if you're, we're gonna give you $30 gift card because you know what I mean?
Sure. So that's awesome and totally legal, but that also has to get into the weighted overtime. Any compensation that you pay if it relates to them actually doing their job has to go into that overtime calculation. Okay. Now, the only exception to that is like a discretionary bonus. You pay a bonus for Christmas, that doesn't get counted into the overtime. Or you just say, you know what, friends, we had a great year. I'm giving everybody $100 bonus just because you were awesome. Well, we had a great month. We had our best month ever for sales. I'm giving everybody $50. That's purely discretionary because it's not like they had to hit certain metrics for that. So that doesn't get counted. But if you say, look, you're picking up a shift with no notice for me, I'm giving you an extra $30 or whatever, yeah, that would be counted in because it's directly tied to the performance of the work. Okay. So be careful of weighted overtime. That's something that gets people all the time. And I know this because like one of the things that I do is I defend home care agencies in class actions and PAGA cases. PAGA is California Private Attorneys General Act. And it's sort of like a poor man's class action. And those things basically say, hey, if you've done things wrong with one person, you've probably done it wrong company-wide. So we're going to sue you on behalf of everybody, right? They're awful cases. Okay, here's some good news. And this is true for family employers as well as for home care agencies. Let me tell you what's not required. If your caregivers are personal attendants, you never have to pay them double time. You never have to provide them with meal periods, and you don't have to provide them with rest periods. None of that. Okay. So like in your office, of course, if you have somebody in your office, you provide him with those things, but not for personal attendants. Okay. And the only overtime is after 9 hours in a day and 40 hours in a week. That's it. Okay. Oh, and you're not required to pay extra for holidays. I know many of you do. That's great if you want to. I'm not saying any of these things are legally prohibited, but you're not required to.
Because we can pick what holidays we pay for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you can, yes. And as long as you pay time and a half, then that holiday premium also doesn't go into the overtime, right? So that's fine. Okay. But be careful. Like what I would say for holidays is you ought to have a policy that says A, the holiday premium doesn't count into overtime. And B, you also need to decide ahead of time, are you paying time and a half the holiday premium, or are you paying time and a half just the regular rate? So a lot of my clients, like say you have a caregiver work on Christmas. If that caregiver normally earns $20, but you pay time and a half on holidays. So she earns $30 an hour for Christmas. Okay. She works a 10-hour shift. She's got 1 hour of overtime. Do you pay $45 for that overtime hour, right? So a carefully crafted policy would say, we don't pay, the holiday rate isn't included in any overtime calculations. So most of my clients would say the first 9 hours are holiday pay at $30. And that last hour is overtime, also at $30, because the regular rate is 20 times 1.5 is 30. Okay. But some employers will say, no, I don't want to do that. I'm going to pay 45 for that one overtime hour. I don't care what you do, but you should have a policy because otherwise you will end up paying 45 if you don't say you're not. Okay. Okay. So we talked about this. So minimum wage is currently $14 an hour for small employers, $15 an hour for larger employers. Again, this is a Marion Hector bonus. You understand that whenever the minimum wage goes up, that the minimum salary requirements go up for your salaried office employees. So if like I get this all the time, they'll say, oh yeah, Susie, she's great. She's my schedule. She's exempt. I pay her $40,000 a year. No, because that's not the minimum required salary to be exempt. To be exempt in the state of California, you have to earn a fixed salary of twice whatever the minimum wage is. So I didn't do the math, but it'd be $30 an hour times 40 for a full week times 52. That's north of 50 grand. So please be careful if you have somebody who's exempt and you're paying them, if you're paying them less than what the minimum salary is for exempt, they are not exempt. Okay. All right. Now, you guys can't see this, but you guys can. I have an enormous list of every single local minimum wage ordinance in the state of California. But here's the great news for the three of you who attended in person. None of them are in Orange County. Not one. Nor are any of them in San Bernardino or Riverside County. Okay. San Diego, yes. So the closest minimum wage places you're going to run into are San Diego, and then once you cross the county line into LA. There's a good number of them in LA. I will simply read this in case anybody has clients. I don't know where the rest of you are, but here we go. I often joke that if this gets any longer, I won't be able to fit it on one slide. And I need my glasses because the print's so small. Okay, they are Alameda, Belmont, Berkeley, Burlingame, Cupertino, Daly City, East Palo Alto, El Cerrito, Emeryville, Fremont, Half Moon Bay, Hayward, Los Altos, Los Angeles City and unincorporated areas, Malibu, Menlo Park, Milpitas, Mountain View, Novato, Oakland, Palo Alto, Pasadena, Petaluma, Redwood City, Richmond, San Carlos, San Diego, San Francisco, San Jose, San Leandro, San Mateo, Santa Clara, Santa Cruz, Santa Monica, Santa Rosa, Sonoma, South San Francisco, Sunnyvale, and West Hollywood. There you have it. Now, but be careful, and I'm serious on this. You can get into trouble if these minimum wages kick in if your caregiver spends more than 2 hours a week in a jurisdiction. Sometimes if they drive through, if they're going back and forth through a jurisdiction that has a higher minimum wage and there's traffic or whatever, and you have to pay travel time, mind you, you may end up having to pay travel time at one of these higher minimum wages if they're driving through these jurisdictions for more than 2 hours, which if they're doing 5 days a week is not unlikely. And so like you all are super lucky. My clients in the Bay Area, it's a disaster. They just figure out whoever has the highest minimum wage and pay it because they get clients going, I mean, you drive through half a dozen of these cities in a day. It's just nuts. Okay, and by the way, the highest is almost always San Francisco.
What is their highest hourly rate?
Oh, I don't even know. It changes every year because it's indexed for inflation. So I don't know. I want to say this is purely spitballing, but for some reason I like 1957 maybe. It's really high. It's almost $20 an hour. Okay. Also bear in mind, minimum wage and overtime apply to everybody. They apply to family employers, they apply to agencies, there's no getting around that. So this is important too. Like, I wanna just hold on, I wanna just make sure we cover this because I know I'm running out of time, so I wanna get everybody out of here too. When I'm talking, oh, sorry, there's no way to get around this. So like, oftentimes I'll see things like people will try and salary caregivers. We talked about that, can't do that. They'll try and make them independent contractors. They can't do that. Caregivers cannot volunteer their time. Okay, I've had this out. They work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday for mom. They just love mom. They just love her. So they just work on the weekends for free. No, that's not no. And by the way, you can't mutually agree to waive it. You can't enter into a writing that says I waive overtime, I waive minimum wage. These are all illegal. You cannot do these things. Okay, I'm going to close with just a brief discussion on, sorry, one more thing. The other thing that everyone has to provide, whether it's a family employer or a home care agency, is paid sick leave. I think we all know this. They earn 1 paid sick day for every 30 hours they work. Okay. You can cap them at using no more than 24 hours in a year. Hold on, I'll get to your question. And accruing no more than 48 hours. Yes.
You said they get a paid sick day for every 30 hours they work?
They earn, sorry, they're 1 hour of pay. They are 1 hour of pay.
Oh, 1 hour.
1 hour of paid sick leave for every 30 hours they work. Sorry, no, maybe I misspoke. It's 1 hour of pay for every 30 hours they work. Okay, and you can cap them at using no more than 24 and accruing no more than 48. So in the worst case scenario, a caregiver can earn 24 hours, use it, and then accrue another 48 hours. Can't use that 48 hours again until the following year, but we'll have it in the bank. Okay. You can also require they use paid sick leave in 2 hour increments. They can't use it until they've worked for you for 90 days. Now, a caveat on this, by the way, is that there are certain jurisdictions, and those are very small, but they are the small number, but you should be aware of it. Berkeley, Emeryville, Los Angeles, Oakland, San Diego, San Francisco, and Santa Monica have their own paid sick leave laws that are more generous than what I just discussed. So please be careful if you have anybody working in those areas. Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah. So I want to close with this, and this is really important for the families. And this is sort of an ad for Hector and Mary, although I don't mean it to be, but it is important. But no, I'm serious. I don't care if you hire somebody directly or if you hire an agency. I think both of those are fine choices. It's sort of like doing your taxes, right? If you're a TurboTax person, you want to do your taxes, that's great. Or if you're the kind of person who wants to dump a shoebox full of receipts on the accountant's desk and say, you handle it, that's great too, okay? But I want to warn everybody about registries or direct referral agencies, DRAs, okay? These look like legitimate home care agencies, but they are very different because they do not employ the caregivers. So the danger of using a registry, if they don't disclose that, they're required by law to disclose. A registry is something that finds a caregiver for you and then refers the caregiver to the family, and the family is still the employer, even though it looks and feels like a regular home care agency because they're sending an invoice to the family and they're supposed to be paying the caregiver. God knows how they actually do that. Registries are fine if they're done lawfully. I represent registries and I've drafted the documents for them. There's nothing wrong with the model as long as it's fully disclosed to people, but oftentimes it's not, okay? So if you're going to use a registry, which is again, something that helps you find a caregiver and you become the employer and they'll facilitate the billing. A registry is usually more expensive than hiring directly, but less expensive than hiring a full service agency. But it's less expensive because they don't take care of all the things that a full service agency does. They don't supervise, they don't provide paid sick leave and substitute caregivers and everything else. So the easiest way to determine if you're dealing with a registry or a full service home care agency that employs their caregivers, ask for the HCO number, home care organization number. That's a number only given to licensed home care agencies registered with the state of California. You can only do that if you employ the caregivers. If they can't provide you with an HCO, you're dealing with a registry. That's okay as long as you go in with eyes wide open and know that you have all these employer responsibilities, okay? Also, you can ask, make sure about workers' comp. Oh, let's talk briefly about workers' comp and I can end on that because I think I've got all this stuff about registries and I don't need to belabor it anymore. I just need you to know that they're out there and you should be aware of it. Workers' comp, everybody has to have workers' comp, including families, okay? Full service agencies will obviously have it through their policies. But if you're a family and you need workers' comp, I have bad news and good news. The bad news is you have to have it. The good news is you may already have it because homeowners policies in the state of California are required to offer workers' comp coverage for household employees. Okay, so and many of them already include it. Others, they charge a rider for it. So if you have somebody working in your home, call up your homeowners insurance policy company and tell them, I have somebody working here. I need workers' comp coverage. The riders aren't that expensive. It's ridiculous. A family, it's super cheap. It's a couple $100 a year. It's nothing compared to the murderous rates that home care agencies pay for this. But remember, you do have to have workers' comp. And if you don't have it, and God forbid your caregiver is injured, because you, and I'm not exaggerating this, will literally be on the hook for the caregiver's bills, medical bills for that injury for the rest of her life if you do not have workers' comp. So that is the sum total of where we are. Questions? You want to talk about anything? It is a little after 1. I'm sorry I kept you, but that's the tax and wage and hour rules for employing somebody in your home. This is important stuff. It's noble work. Okay, it really is. It keeps people in their homes for their independence and their dignity. And I applaud all of you for being a part of it. And if we can help you with this, I'd be glad to do it. We help people hire people legally, and we defend them if they've done things wrong, whether they're home care agencies or family employers, whatever we can do.
I have 2 quick questions.
Fire away.
So if a family does want to go do it their own, can you help them set up the contracts, the employment contracts?
Yes. So I'm here just to tell you the law. I don't do sales pitches, but absolutely, yes. So we have a flat fee package. If you're going to hire somebody in your home, then we'll register you as an employer. We'll submit all the new hire paperwork. We'll do an employment agreement for you. We'll give you an online payroll tax calculator. We'll help you get all of this set up. Yes.
Can I ask about how much?
Sure, it's on our website. It's $1,995. So $1,995, and we do everything. Now, the two things we don't do, I want to be very clear. We don't pay the caregiver for you. We give you the online payroll tax calculator. We show you how to do it. You're just going to write a personal check for the net wages shown on the payroll calculator. We don't pay the taxes for you either. We show you how to do that. It's literally logging on to an account with the state once a quarter. For the feds, it's even easier. It's preparing a W-2 form once each year. So it's really easy. And if you decide you don't even want to do that, we can recommend a payroll service for you to handle those things.
That was going to be my next question, because that usually is the biggest thing from people that want to try to do it on their own.
Yep.
Is getting a payroll company. So you have
Right.
that.
So sure, we can recommend that for you. I will tell you point blank that it's not necessary to have a payroll company. Most of our clients don't use a payroll company. You can easily do it yourself because you're just going to go to the online payroll calculator. You don't have to worry about what the tax rates are, frankly, even what the math is. And you're going to write a check. And you're going to keep track of that on a spreadsheet. And you're going to use that spreadsheet to pay the taxes. But if you don't want to do any of it, we can certainly recommend a payroll company. That's a good point, though. I would strongly recommend, if you're going to use a payroll company, don't use an ADP or a Paychex, whatever. They're fine companies, but you should use a payroll company that actually specializes in household employment because the rules are different.
And can us that are doing the Zoom, can we get a copy of your?
Sure. So I sent the presentation to Tara. Tara can email it to you.
Okay, super.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry I had to keep popping in and out. I had a tech guy on my other computer.
You're fine. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate it.
I kind of already know the.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
But if they want to hire somebody that's illegal, they're still going to have.
Oh, yeah,
regulations.
right. So that's an excellent question. So if somebody is not legal to work in the US, all these same laws apply. You can't, like, it's not a defense to say, oh, but they're not legal, so I don't have to pay. No, in fact, all that means is you violated yet another law.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's super easy. This is a good question because it's something that comes up a lot. Anyone can determine if someone's legal to work. All you need to do is Google I-9 form, okay? And they can show one form of ID from column A, which is usually like a passport, or one each from columns B and C. If they can show you that ID, they're legal to work. You don't have to worry about it, okay? So if you're gonna hire anybody privately in your home, I would strongly encourage you to print out the I-9 form, give it to the person. It's part of what we do for the flat fee package, but when you're interviewing people, you can even say, can you show me one form of ID from column A or one each from columns B and C? And if they can, you're good to go. Anything else? No? Yes.
Of course, I always have another question.
I love it. Go ahead.
So, I totally want everybody to go through agencies. Sorry, my apologies.
I'm gonna push back. Wait, I'm gonna push back. There's nothing wrong with hiring directly as long as you do it with eyes wide open.
No, I think everybody should go through an agency.
Okay,
It's just safer.
fair enough.
I try to recommend that. Every now and then I'll run into somebody that there is a family member there that is helping. There is a way they can get paid some compensation for helping with prepping meals and shopping and taking care of mom, isn't there?
For the family
For the
member?
family member.
Oh, sure. So as I said at the beginning of this presentation, they're not, okay, so let's be careful. Let's be very precise here. I'm talking about a parent, child, or spouse. Okay, if they're a parent, child, or spouse, they're not considered an employee. Okay, so if the parent wants to pay, of course they can do it, but they're not required to. Those people aren't covered by wage and hour laws. If they're a cousin, though, or interestingly, a sibling, right? Those people are considered employees and are required to be paid. And everything's fine until it isn't. So like if you're a grandchild, again, somebody who's not exempted, right? If the grandchild is caring and all of a sudden like things go badly and the grandchild realizes he's left out of the will, the inheritance, that grandchild can absolutely sue for all the wages that are owed. Oh, it does. Absolutely. Everything is fine until it isn't. The most common time for lawsuits to occur are after the death of the person receiving care. Why? Because there is an emotional attachment usually between the caregiver and the client. When the client dies, that's when things go haywire. Or the son who's always been a pain in the neck to the caregiver in the first place, like, now the caregiver is angry at him, but loves the mother. So mother passes away, then caregiver sues the son or sues the mother's estate, to be precise. And by the way, if you think I'm joking, there are lawyers out there, like literally Google caregiver overtime. And there are lawyers that all they do is specialize in representing caregivers in overtime lawsuits or wage and hour lawsuits. I know because I go up against them all the time. They use me as an expert witness in some of their cases. So, and they're really good. And if it's certain ones, if they take it, you know, there's liability and it's a problem.
I thought there was a state program that would compensate a family member, say it's a daughter that's taking care of mom.
So you're talking about IHSS, okay? So IHSS, which is in-home support services, applies to low-income families who can use that to basically have the state provide for a certain number of hours per month for care, and the family can select who it wants for a caregiver. So in that case, sure, the mom could select her son as her caregiver, and the son would get paid through the state through IHSS. Yeah, it's possible. It's only for low income, and it's a limited number of hours per week. Yeah,
Can you go anywhere with it, with the funds that you get, or do they have to be approved agencies?
No.
It's not an agency.
You're directly employing somebody,
It's a
yeah.
person.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So if you apply for IHSS funding and you qualify, you can then say, they can say, hey, Tara, we've got half a dozen caregivers lined up that we can, and you can say, no, I want my son. Okay, fine. And then assuming your son can pass the background check and the requirements, then your son will be listed as a state employee of IHSS. The state will pay your son, and your son will provide the care. So, yeah.
A lot of low-income patients whose kids do take
Absolutely.
care of them just to get them in and out of bed. That might-
Sure. No, absolutely. It's
Got to quit work in order to do that.
yep, it's
What
possible.
I found though is a long time ago, they used to pay, like, you know, this caregiver would get this. Now I'm finding that IHSS will say, we'll pay this amount and then you have to pay the other amount.
Yeah, well, the thing is, IHSS, look, I once had an agency owner describe IHSS as sort of the bottom of the barrel for caregivers. And I mean, look, I don't pass that judgment because I don't know, but I will tell you, they generally pay very low. They don't pay as much. So the caregivers you're getting there are not usually the greatest. Now, if you're using it just to supplement your income for care you're doing anyway, hey, that's a different story. It's fine. But yeah, it's not the same caliber generally.
Did I hear you correctly? There, if you have is that to be a family member or a friend?
No,
That-
anybody,
for your
no,
ca-
anybody.
So if I
Anybody.
have a friend that could care for so-and-so, they can apply to be the caregiver as long as they pass the background check?
Sure,
Yes.
assuming the client qualifies for IHSS, so she's low income. And again, it provides a small number, I want to say maybe 20 hours a month, maybe, it's not a great deal of hours per month. But sure, yeah, if they apply for IHSS will say, we've got half a dozen caregivers, but you can nominate your own caregiver. And if your caregiver can pass the requirements to be a caregiver, namely a background check, then generally speaking, IHSS will let you select your own caregiver and pay that person.
Great. Okay, I didn't know that one.
Yeah. Anything else from anybody else?
Have you
No.
ever heard of silver bills?
Silver
It
bills.
is a concierge bill payment that they use for seniors. I can send you the
I don't
information
know them.
for to talk about it. So they're, yeah, I can forward this information. So it's definitely more for seniors to help with bill paying.
Okay.
And they report everything to the family and whatever. things are going
Interesting.
on.
Yeah, I'm sure there's lots of services like that, you know, but yes, I've not heard of that one in particular, but yeah. Okay,
Thank you.
I think we're all set. So thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I'm gonna, that's all right. No, I can figure this out, and we'll stop sharing here and we'll end this. All right, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.